Hi, class, and welcome back to the discussion of the story The Birthmark by Nathaniel Hawthorne. What I have presented to you here today is actually a cover picture of the story. Now, look at that. Okay, we have already begun reading the story, and we saw that the story was actually about Elmer and Georgiana. Okay, Elmer, who was a scientist, and he falls in love and marries the most beautiful woman that he's ever seen, who's called Georgiana. But soon after he is married, he suddenly comes to notice, when that all that veil of love is gone, he notices that there's a mark on his wife's face. Now, he had noticed this before also, and we are told in the previous paragraphs we discussed how the Georgiana had so many different lovers and how each of them perceived this particular mark. So Elmer knew about this mark before, but it did not disturb him much. But it's only after she became his wife and he saw that she was perfect in every other sense, the only flaw that she had was this particular birthmark on her face that he says looks like a tiny red hand, right? So it began to irritate him, it began to annoy him. He became very, very restless, also because he's a scientist, right? So he strives for perfection and he wants to find an answer for this birthmark. All right, and that is what is presented in this picture here. You can imagine that this is Georgiana and this is the birthmark that's there on her face. All right, I have also got some more pictures for you. There, this picture is a little bit more clearer. See that in this, it's actually conceptualized as a tiny hand, right? And there's one more picture of another cover that I have brought for you, and that is this one. Look at that. Look, this is Elmer. He's looking at her birthmark, and even from this picture itself, look at their expression. This tells us a lot about. Sorry, I don't know if my sharing is being shown. All right, 1 second. I'll just pause and make sure that it's being done. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that I closed the window accidentally. See, this is the picture. Look at that. Look at their expressions. Before I go into the story, I want you to look at that. It's not a very clear picture, but look at the manner in which Elmer, and this one eye, it's larger. He's using a magnifying glass to look at that tiny, small little flaw on her otherwise perfect face. So this tells us a lot about the story and a lot about the characters. And look at Georgiana. She does not seem happy, right? So just remember this picture as we are discussing the story. All right. All right, so to begin with, let's continue with our reading of the story, and then we'll come back to the pictures and analyze what happened, right? Because I don't want to give anything away. I don't want to take away the suspense. All right, so yes, we were talking about how how the different lovers used to perceive Georgiana's beauty and that mark on her face, and how for Elmer it became something that disturbed him so much that everything else that about her made him happy. But this small little flaw became larger. It gave him more trouble and more horror than ever Georgiana's beauty could give him any sort of delight. All right, so it became like an obsession for him. At all the seasons which should have been their happiest, he invariably and without intending it, nay, in spite of a purpose to the contrary, reverted to this one disastrous topic. Okay, so no matter whether they are happy or in a normal state of affairs, what have ever happened in all the seasons, no matter what is the external manner of their life, even if they are happy, without intending it, without he always came back to this one disastrous topic. What is what the author calls it. Okay, he keeps coming back. He's keeping on fixating on this particular mark. Trifling as it first appeared, it so connected itself with innumerable trains of thoughts and modes of feeling that it became the central point of all. All right, so trifling means what? Trifling means very, very silly, very small. Okay, so it might seem like it does seem like a quite small affair to us as we are reading, and it must have seemed so to the others who were present in the story. All right, but it's so connected. The small tiny thing, the small tiny red hand that was on his wife's face, it connected with all his trains of thoughts, all the thoughts that he had. It was connected to this one topic. All right, so much so that it became the central topic of all his thoughts. He couldn't think about anything else. With the morning twilight, Aylmer opened his eyes upon his wife's face and recognized the symbol of imperfection. All right, and when they sat together at the evening hearth, his eyes wandered stealthily to her cheek and beheld flickering with the blaze of wood fire the spectral hand that wrote mortality where he would fain have worshipped. Okay, so look at that. Every morning as he woke up, the first thing that he would see when he opened his eyes was that symbol of imperfection, that small hand that was there on her face. And every evening, when they sat by the fire, evening hearths the fire, all right, and they might be doing something else, but his eyes would invariably reach her cheek once again. And in that wood fire, in that light of the wood fire, he would look at that hand, okay, that wrote mortality. What is mortality? Mortality means എന്താ എല്ലാത്തിനും ഒരു അന്ത്യമുണ്ട് എന്നുള്ള വിശ്വാസം അല്ലേ, that everything ends, everything will die. So why mortality is being used here? Because for him everything else about Georgiana is angelic. She's not of this world, but this one thing is what makes her a mortal എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. All right, so if that was not there, you could almost worship her എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. Georgiana soon learned to shudder at his gaze. It needed but a glance with peculiar expression that his face often bore to change the roses of her cheek into a death-like paleness, amid which the crimson hand was brought strongly out like a bas relief of ruby on the whitest marble. Okay, so soon Georgiana obviously began becoming disturbed by his glances and his gazes. എപ്പോഴും ഇങ്ങനെ ആ മുഖത്തെ ആ പാടിലോട്ട് മാത്രം നോക്കിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുക അല്ലെ. അപ്പൊ അത് ശ്രദ്ധിച്ചു തുടങ്ങി കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോഴത്തേക്കും എന്താ, she started to shudder. എന്താ, ഒരു വിറയ്ക്കുന്ന പോലെ അവൾക്ക് തോന്നും. She was almost disgusted, almost afraid of the manner in which he used to look at her. All right, so what happens is that as soon as she would notice that he is looking at her otherwise rosy face, നല്ല ചുമന്നൊക്കെ ഇരിക്കുന്ന മുഖം, നല്ല ഭംഗിയുള്ള മുഖം അല്ലേ, അതിൽ നിന്നുള്ള ആ കളർ എല്ലാം പോയിട്ട് she would become very, very pale. ആ വൈറ്റ് സ്കിൻ മാത്രമായിട്ട് വരും. All the blood would leave her face. And അങ്ങനെ വൈറ്റ് സ്കിൻ ആയി കഴിയുമ്പോൾ എന്താ, ആ മാർക്ക് ഒന്നുകൂടെ പ്രൊനൗൺസ്ഡ് ആയിട്ട്, ഒന്നുകൂടെ കളറായിട്ട് കാണാൻ പറ്റും. ഓൾമോസ്റ്റ് ലൈക്ക് എ റൂബി, ഒരു റെഡ് റൂബി ഓൺ എ വൈറ്റ് മാർബിൾ എങ്ങനെ ഇരിക്കുമോ അതുപോലെയാണ് ഇരുന്നത് എന്ന് പറയുന്നു. Late one night, when the lights were growing dim so as hardly to betray the stain on the poor wife's cheek, she herself for the first time voluntarily took up the subject. "Do you remember, my dear Alma," she said, with a feeble attempt at a smile, "have you any recollection of a dream last night about this odious hand?" None whatever," replied Alma, staring. But then he added in a cold, dry tone, affected for the sake of concealing the real depth of his emotion, "I might well dream of it, for before I fell asleep, it had taken a pretty firm hold of my fancy." All right. So late one night, when they were sitting by a very, very dim light, a dim light because the stain on her face was not very prominent because of the dim light at that point. So that is the first time that she herself took up the topic of this stain, of this mark on her face. She usually does not talk about it. All right, and she asked her husband Elmer whether he remembers that he had a dream of this hand last night. ഇന്നലെ രാത്രി ഉറങ്ങിയപ്പോൾ ഇതിനെക്കുറിച്ചുള്ള സ്വപ്നം കണ്ടിരുന്നു. She says none whatever. Obviously people do not remember their dreams, so he says that none, I don't remember it, but it might be possible because just before falling asleep I was thinking about this mark. All right, so because he's so obsessed with it, just before falling asleep he had been thinking about this mark, so it's probable that probably he might have dreamed about it. "And you did dream of it," continued Georgiana hastily, for she dreaded lest a gush of tears should interrupt what she had to say. "A terrible dream. I wonder that you can forget it. Is it possible to forget this one expression? It is in her heart now. We must have it out." reflect, my husband, for by all means I would have you recall that dream. All right. So it is the next day when Georgiana is asking him, and you did dream of it. So you did. Appa swapnam kandirunnu, alle? And then, she's overcome with emotion, and, she's trying to control it because she does not want to start crying. So she said, a terrible dream. I'm sure it was. Even if you do not remember, I think it was a terrible dream. I wonder that you can forget it. I don't think that you will be able to forget it because it seems like a terrible dream. Now, how does Georgiana know what he dreamed about? It is because when he was dreaming, he said something out loud in his sleep. ഓർക്കത്തിൽ എന്തോ വലിയതായിട്ട് വിളിച്ചു പറഞ്ഞു. എന്താണ് പറഞ്ഞത്? It is in her heart now. We must have it out. Okay, that was one expression that he said. എന്താണ്? അത് അവളുടെ ഹൃദയത്തിലുണ്ട്. അതിനെ പറിച്ചു മാറ്റണം എന്ന്. So that obsession that he has with that stain is so much that he's ready to, hurt her. So she's afraid now of him. Reflect, my husband, she says. Remember, try and reflect and remember. For by all means, I would have you recall that dream. I know that no matter what it takes, I want you to remember that dream. എന്നാണ് ജോർജിയാന പറയുന്നത്. The mind is in a sad state when asleep. The all-involving cannot confine her spectres within the dim region of her sway, but suffers them to break forth, affrighting this actual life with secrets that perchance belong to a deeper one. Alma now remembered his dream. He had fancied himself with his servant, Aminadab, attempting an operation for the removal of the birthmark. But the deeper went the knife, the deeper sank the hand, until at length its tiny grasp appeared to have caught hold of Georgiana's heart, whence, however, her husband was inexorably resolved to cut it or wrench it away. All right. So, when Georgiana asks this, he starts to reflect and he says that, when we are sleeping, our mind is in a very, very sad state, he says. Okay, because sad, why? Because you cannot control any of your emotions when you're sleeping. When you are awake, your conscious mind helps you to control many things. But when you're asleep, your conscious mind is also asleep. So the subconscious comes into the front and, it starts playing games with you. So all the things that you keep hidden, that you keep confined within you, they break forth, they can come outside. And that's why, if you have read Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, he talks about how our subconscious repressed desires are the ones that come out when you are dreaming. All right. So all those things that, in your actual life, you try to hide, that belong to a deeper side of your life, it comes out when you are sleeping. And now Almer, when she said this, he remembers what he dreamed. What did he dream? That he had dreamt that along with his servant Aminadab, okay, is a servant that he has, he was attempting an operation for the removal of the birthmark. Appo idu satyamalla, the orkathil, adayathu സ്വപ്നത്തിൽ കണ്ട കാര്യമാണ്, that he was attempting to operate out this mark. ആ മാർക്കിനെ അവിടുന്ന് എടുത്തു കളയാനുള്ള ഒരു ഓപ്പറേഷൻ ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ് സ്വപ്നം കണ്ടത്. പക്ഷെ അത് ഓപ്പറേഷൻ ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ഡീപ്പർ ആയിട്ട് അത് സർഫേസ് ലെവലിലുള്ള ഒരു പാടാണ് അല്ലെ. പക്ഷെ അതിനെ തൊടാൻ പോകുമ്പോ എന്താ സംഭവിക്കുന്നത്? ഈ പാട് ഉള്ളിലേക്ക് കയറി പോവുകയാണ്. the hand sunk deeper എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. ഓക്കെ, അതായത് അത് ഉള്ളിലേക്ക് കയറി പോയി until its tiny grasp, ഒരു കൈയാണെന്നല്ലേ പറയുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ അതിങ്ങനെ പിടിക്കുകയാണ്. എന്താ കയറി പിടിച്ചത്? അവസാനം it held her heart. ജോർജിയാനാസ് ഹാർട്ട് ആണ് പോയി ആ കൈ പിടിച്ചത് എന്ന് പറയുന്നു. However, her husband was so obsessed that he decide to cut it. ആ കൈനെ അവിടെ നിന്ന് കട്ട് ചെയ്ത് കളയാനോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ ഹാർട്ടിനെ അവിടെ നിന്ന് പറിച്ചു മാറ്റാൻ വരെ അയാൾ റെഡി ആയിരുന്നു, just to get rid of that hand. When the dream had shaped itself perfectly in his memory, Alma sat in his wife's presence with a guilty feeling. Truth often finds its way to the mind close muffled in robes of sleep, and then speaks with uncompromising directness of matters in regard to which we practice an unconscious self-deception during our waking moments. All right. Until now, he had not been aware of the tyrannizing influence acquired by one idea over his mind, and of lengths at which he might find in his heart to go for the sake of giving himself peace. Right. So when the dream had shaped itself perfectly in his memory, when he remembered it perfectly, okay, he felt very, very guilty in his wife's presence. Why? Because the wife had found out what his inmost desires were, that he would go at any length to get rid of this mark. അല്ലെ, എന്ത് വേണേലും ചെയ്യും ആ ഒരു മാർക്ക് ഇല്ലാതെ ആക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി എന്ന് വൈഫിന് ഇപ്പൊ മനസ്സിലായി.